success.
Perfect. Okay. Go ahead,
So
Carol.
I'll get us going now. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening or midnight to everybody here. We know we have people from all over the world. Welcome to the second day of the annual ISQOLS conference. And I'm most pleased to be introducing my dear friend and colleague, Julie RUSK. She is really a pioneer in terms of using well-being metrics to better municipal policy, to deal with equity and inclusion issues, to pioneer the practice of using well-being as a frame for municipal budgeting, even in the city of Santa Monica. So she's done everything from take the scientific measurement aspects of the approach and to putting in a whole host of policies in the city of Santa Monica. She is the founder of Civic Wellbeing Partners, and I can't read her whole bio because it's long and impressive, but I'll try and hit on the main parts. And a strategic leader focused on social impact partnerships, focused on equity and well-being for all. And after 3 decades in local government and nonprofit leadership, Julie co-founded Civic Wellbeing Partners in July 2020, which is a startup project designed to advance and spread well-being leadership and practice. She developed the City of Santa Monica's award-winning work to define, measure, and actively improve community well-being, including Santa Monica's Wellbeing Index, which was the first of its kind, and I was lucky enough to be involved at the margins of that and learned a great deal. Prior to that, Julie developed and led the city's human services, which included a diverse portfolio of social health, cultural education, affordable housing, recreation, and placemaking initiatives. She's led nationally recognized efforts to deal with homelessness and youth violence, and spearheaded Santa Monica's winning submission for the 2016 Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize. She's been voted the League of Women Voters Women Who Shape Santa Monica Award, and has a host of other affiliations and awards, but I think I won't take more time. Needless to say, she's very impressive, and her bio is also available in the program. Julie is giving the Alex C. Michalos Lecture. This is named for one of the former ISQOLS presidents and a prominent scholar in the field of quality of life, Alex Michalos, and an absolutely charming scholar to boot. And the fund was set up to permanently endow this lecture in his name at all of the ISQOLS conferences. So with that, no further ado, I will turn it over to Julie. We have a little under 90 minutes, and she's gonna queue up a couple of points in the lecture where it may be appropriate to open up for questions. So we'll be back with you, but for now, Julie, thank you again for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Carol. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I again echo Carol's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am here in Santa Monica, California, on the West Coast of the United States, and just came last night from New York. So I've been traveling time zones like many of you participating in this. So thank you so much for including me in this event. What I'm going to do today is I've sort of segmented my talk into 3 areas. The first will be really to give you an overview of what it is we've done over the last really 10 years where we've been explicitly focused on well-being and a well-being initiative. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of that, how it began, what we did, give you some examples of use cases, and then bring you right up to what's happened with our initiative since the pandemic began in 2020, and since I launched with my colleague Catalina Langen our efforts Civic Wellbeing Partners to really share and spread this work. So the first section will be about what we've done. The second section will be really focused on what we've learned, the challenges, the lessons, some of the key elements that we've identified for getting started on these kinds of initiatives. And then finally, the third section will end on a note of some of my thoughts about how we might all really work together to leverage our expertise and continue to advance this really important field of research and practice around well-being, around environmental sustainability, around equity. So at each of those three sections, I'll pause and be happy to have some questions and discussions. So let me start by telling you a little bit about our story, why well-being, why Santa Monica, a little bit about myself. I've, ran a nonprofit in Boston, Massachusetts before I came to Santa Monica and really developed our human services portfolio, as Carol mentioned. And, one of the things that we identified inside City Hall, where I worked for several decades in Santa Monica, and really in partnership with many community leaders and stakeholders across Santa Monica, was that while we had done so much that really was we're proud of as a community to really center taking care of people and understanding the needs of people and having smart public policy that was collaborative, we really identified about 10 years ago that there was a need for us to do more and to do better. And that in spite of some of our best intentions, that we were really lacking with good data at a population level to understand how our residents were doing, as well as evaluative data at the more programmatic or policy level to really assess the initiatives that we had going in Santa Monica. So Santa Monica is a relatively small, medium-sized city in the Los Angeles area of Southern California. We have a resident population of just over 90,000 and a daytime population of several hundred thousand people who work here and who are tourists and visitors in our community. We're a full service city. We've got a very long and I think proud tradition of being a progressive city, made a lot of investments in everything from the arts and affordable housing, environmental sustainability, many partnerships with our public schools, with our community college. And so we really have been at the forefront of really good governance and governance partnerships. So how did we get into well-being? Well, after we had a really serious series of crises in the early 2009, 10, 11, 12, we had several very violent murders, a very public suicide of a ninth grader at our high school. And we really identified, many of us came together and said, again, in spite of all of our best intentions, are we really hitting the mark with knowing if we're effective and how we're really moving the needle on the things that matter to people? And so we started in the area of early childhood and youth. And it was there that many of our community leaders came together in 2010, 11, 12, and developed what became our first youth report card. And in the process of really gathering data, because we had really identified that we weren't using sort of shared metrics around understanding how kids and families were doing. And in that process, we really did quite a bit of research. We scanned what was happening in other parts of the country and the world. And we identified that we were missing data. So as we began to collect data from just different sources, everything from police data to how our 5-year-olds were doing in kindergarten, physical health, mental health data, reports from surveys, we put all this together and came up with the construct of really what we were doing was trying to understand the milestones that made up a youth well-being initiative. And it was around that time that Bloomberg Philanthropies issued a call for innovation ideas. And Santa Monica, our team pitched this idea of taking the work that we had begun to develop in the area of youth around measuring well-being, and really to extend that to a local well-being index. And the idea was that, again, we found a lot of interest from our community leaders in really understanding things that mattered to people, and wanted to make sure that that information that would be collected in a well-being index would be front and center in our public policy and in our governance. So in 2013, we were one of 5 winning communities for a Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, which really set us on the path of developing our well-being initiative. And the idea is, again, going beyond GDP to really understand the things that matter to people. So what did we do? Well, here in Santa Monica, we're really very fortunate to have one of our key partners in our community to be the RAND Corporation, which is headquartered here in Santa Monica. And I will say I had the wonderful opportunity to meet someone who's become a dear friend and colleague, along with Carol, Anita Chandra. And Anita is a leader at RAND who really is at the forefront of really understanding what it takes to define, measure, and actively improve well-being. And with our innovation prize from Bloomberg, we partnered with RAND. They brought in Sama Abada, who at the time was with the New Economics Foundation, who had clearly been at the lead of measuring subjective well-being. And what we did was we spent about a year and a half or so to really work with a panel of experts to guide our understanding of what well-being really is, what are the characteristics and the qualities that local government can really tackle, and what should be understood. And we developed a well-being framework. And I'll certainly make these slides available, and there's a lot of information on our website. We really were looking at how to really understand the multifaceted nature of the things that make up not only individual and subjective well-being, or what we call in the top bar of this graph, outlook, life satisfaction, flourishing, purpose, those kinds of things, but how the characteristics of a community, the policies of a community in terms of our social networks, civic engagement, all of the things, the second vertical here under place and planet, looking at the characteristics of the built and the natural environment. Particularly in Santa Monica, it was important for us to understand our access to neighborhood amenities, to mobility, to how we get around, transportation, etc. The third area being learning across the life cycle, everything from learning for very young children to lifelong learning, and the behaviors and skills that would support people in continuing to learn throughout the life cycle. Obviously, health, physical health, mental health, healthy behaviors, access to amenities and resources that can support health, and then finally the area of economic opportunity, both really measuring and understanding the sort of ecosystem of the economy, and as important, or perhaps more importantly, how individuals access that ecosystem. Really, what are the opportunities for community wealth building, for security, economic security? We know how important this is. So this was the framework that we used to really set ourselves up as we began to look at what are the data sources that we thought would be most helpful to populate a well-being framework and create a well-being index. Again, I think many of you know and understand the value of frameworks. So just to sort of step back and say, part of why we thought it was particularly important to focus on creating a local well-being framework for our index was because we wanted to be very thoughtful about how to invest our resources. We wanted to really look closely and be able to measure and understand the assets within our community. We understood that any kind of index that is really looking at people needs to be able to disaggregate and to really look at the not only the assets, but the disparities by race, by gender, by different neighborhoods. So we really saw that this organizing principle of a well-being framework could really help us understand racial equity and be a tool for racial equity. And then finally, by kind of naming something as a well-being framework, well, part of what we were doing in Santa Monica was strengthening what had been a long-standing commitment to environmental sustainability, and really holding a vision that it was as important for us to understand people as it is to understand our planet, and put all that together. So the framework that I shared, the data that we populated that framework with, together made our local well-being index. And let me talk just very briefly about the data sources that we used. We were combining sources from various administrative data that we had across the city, everything from voter registration and volunteer rates, for instance, in measuring our community sort of social connections. But then we paired that with data from a new open source survey that we created that's available and has been used by many other communities, and we encourage you to take a look at if you're interested in. We use this resident survey to collect some new data about subjective well-being, and about the sort of understanding and the perceptions and the behaviors of our residents. And we put that data, the administrative data, and then we did some mining of social media to really understand what was trending on Twitter. We used open source data from everything from Zillow to doing some sentiment analysis across some major big data sources. So all of this was put together in about 100 different data points that was organized in our index. And we really were very mindful about setting up an index that could be understood and analyzed by zip code, by demographics, and really look at cross-cutting issues across the entire city. And the purpose of this was to help us identify solutions and opportunities to really be more effective with our government resources. So what did we learn? And here, if my screen is working properly, which it may be beginning to share, we have some examples of the data visualization from what we learned in our survey. And I'm seeing it's not pulling all the way up now. So this may be something that you'll need to take a look at offline if you're interested in. But we've spent quite a bit of time really looking at how we could share the data and make it really accessible and easily understood by both policymakers, department leaders inside city government, and of course our residents and community members. And we really tried to help people understand that by pairing different data sources together, you can really get a more holistic understanding of how people are doing. And you'll see some of the kinds of questions we asked, and some of the things that we learned really helped us to understand things like, for instance, here, the worry about paying rent or mortgage. Santa Monica is a community with about 70% of our population being renters and living in multifamily housing. And so this topic of security and economic and housing security is a really important one for us. You can see that there were sort of increases in rates of people worrying about their economic situation. This topic, this was one of our key questions that community leaders had identified, really wanting to understand, did people who were growing up in Santa Monica feel like this was a community that was for them when they grew older? And did people who were living here feel like their kids would be able to afford to live here? And as you can see, the worry that people couldn't afford to live here has been increasing steadily over a number of years. So some of the kinds of things that we measured were things that we felt were really important that city government could really impact. So this was an interesting one. Santa Monica is a place that prides itself on a tremendous amount of resident and community input. And yet, in spite of our high rates of volunteerism, our high rates of participating in voting, 1 in 5 residents feel that they can influence decision making. And that was that trend of really feeling like it was difficult to influence decision making was something that was really a troubling finding, because again, we're a city that thinks of ourselves as being so accessible and available to our residents. So these were some of the kinds of things that we learned. What the point of this, obviously, was not to simply collect data for the sake of collecting data, but to collect data that we could use, not just inside city government, although that was our key priority, but our partner institutions and our residents and community leaders. So we spent quite a bit of time really looking for ways to share this data, to bring people together, and to create kind of a shared understanding about what was important in terms of these findings. What questions did it open up? What more did we want to learn given that we had this data? And you'll see here in this slide where there's a couple of examples of some of the ways we really use not only our framework, but findings from the index. And I want to speak about 2 of those right now. One was very early on after our first, and I will say we fielded and collected and analyzed the data that was part of the index in 2015, 2017, and 2019. And one of the things we did with the 2015 and 17 data was really focused on how it could be useful in our land use, zoning, and regulatory processes of city government. So you'll see here, we looked at the data in our downtown, the index data in our downtown, and it really helped us to understand the important characteristics that we were really needing to work on to improve the quality of life and to improve the well-being of our downtown residents. And this is an example of something from our downtown community plan that was really supported by the findings and the information in our well-being index. Another thing that I would like to point to, and again, this really does go to the point of what is the purpose of government? And we really, as the work evolved over the years, one of the things our city leadership, our city council, our city manager thought was really important, and this was really a goal of the work that we had, as we had pitched it to Bloomberg Philanthropies back when we began, was to embed this in the operating system of government. And so one of the things that we did was we really used this framework to help us think about what all the different operational departments in government do. I mean, the budget process is one of those things in most organizations, but certainly in local government, that everyone participates in. All departments have a stake in it. So one of the things we did over several years was we really engaged in a series of activities to use our well-being framework to really set some goals, to really think a little bit more about the purpose of what's happening in various departments. So for instance, oftentimes in performance management and in really looking at the effectiveness of really in any organization, but certainly in government, we do a lot of counting of the size and the number of transactions. And you can have a very vibrant program with lots of participants and not move the needle on the well-being or the things that matter in the community. And so one of the things that we were really using this process and this approach to help us sharpen was the understanding of, again, what is the purpose of our fire and police departments? What is the purpose of our business regulatory departments? How can we make sure that we have a clear understanding of really the effectiveness when it comes to the people in our community? So the other thing we did with the index is we used as an opportunity to gather more data and to establish some innovation projects. One of the ones that we was really a fun project was Fitbit donated, and this was a number of years ago, but they donated a couple of hundred wearable devices, and we had a project in one of our zip codes where people who were interested opted in, they got a Fitbit, they could share their data. It was all anonymized. And it really helped us to understand some things about people's behaviors. And if they lived closer to a park, for instance, were they more likely to be walking and getting active? And so it really gave us a chance to really better understand some of the behaviors at an individual level, the relationship between the city amenities and the neighborhood options available to people, and how people were doing. And finally, I wanted to point to some of the work we did to really, I think it had a bit of multiple benefits. So one of the things that's was really important to us in Santa Monica government was to be very, very clear that well-being is not something that just comes out of a vending machine. It's not just you sort of put money in, kick the machine if you don't get it and you get more of it. This is something that we all have a role to play in. So one of the things that we did in the last couple of years was just a lot more work to engage the community. One example of that that we're continuing now as we're working in a nonprofit capacity in Santa Monica is our Wellbeing microgrants. And those have been a tremendous way to really get residents to engage with the data, to think about the solutions that they see that would really make their community stronger. They can be in the area of health, they can be in the areas of racial equity. We had a group of moms that did a pop-up playground on an empty lot, which then led the city to purchasing that lot so that we could create a community garden and gathering space where there had once been a blighted area. So there were lots of suggestions that have come directly from residents, and they would, in getting a well-being microgrant, people pitch an idea, they tie it to the data. There's a little bit of pre and post testing so that we can really understand at the programmatic level how people are understanding well-being, and if they're understanding of the amenities that are available in a community, if their understanding of how local government works has increased, if their own confidence and engagement has really improved by participating in this. So this has been a really wonderful program. We have many other examples of how we've used data from the Wellbeing Index to improve some operational areas, to really tied to things like, we have a kindergarten readiness campaign that was created a number of years ago that was very focused on the well-being of kindergartners and their parents and caregivers. That tapped in our library and pediatricians and early childcare providers. So there are a number of things that we've done with the data that I think are really important to lift up of examples about why do a project like this. So what I want to move to as I sort of wrap up this piece about what we've done here in Santa Monica is tell you a bit about what's happened since COVID. In the spring of 2020, like many communities across the country, Santa Monica was hit hard by a real economic downturn that came as a result of COVID. We lost upwards of 25% of our city's general funds. We closed libraries. Not only did everything happen remotely, as it happened all across the country and the world, but we really eliminated quite a bit of the programmatic and operational elements that brought Santa Monica together and really did a lot of the groundbreaking work that we're so proud of. So one of the things that we were able to work out at that time was that our Office of Civic Wellbeing made a shift and pivoted to partner with a nonprofit here in Santa Monica, the Santa Monica Human Relations Council. And we continued our micro grants. We've taken the data assets, the technology, the website, and much of the learnings from this well-being work. And we're really organizing it and situating it in our community. So the work is continuing. The index itself and the survey and how we continue that data collection is part of what we're really looking at right now. There's some new data that we were very interested to collect in the post-COVID environment, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I think what I really wanted to sort of leave you with in terms of, again, what we did here in Santa Monica, excuse me, before we talk about the lessons learned, is that this work is really about culture change. And, you know, I wanted to share a quote that came from Catherine Trebek, who is leading the groundbreaking work of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Europe. And she was talking about what would it look like if well-being was at the heart of our economic system in all ways, including our cities. And one of the things that she said that I really liked that I wanted to share is people would be working less. They'd be in more fulfilling jobs that would pay them enough to live on. Cities would no longer be designed for cars and for consumption, but they'd be designed for communities. Businesses would be using their commercial success to deliver social and environmental progress. You know, we'd have a real caring economy. We might be living in co-housing. We'd be walking to work because there'd be more ways to get around. And we'd be regenerating the natural world rather than plundering it. So I want to say this work really is about that kind of important cultural change, which makes it a real challenge and which really leads to the next section about what we learned. But before we go to that, which I'm going to move on to here, I just want to see if there's any questions about what it is that we did, how we did it, and then we'll move into some of what we learned. And I do see that there's a question in the Q&A. Jill?
Yeah, I'm here. Do you want me to read that, or would you like?
Yeah, I'm looking at the question. Did you allow the residents to voice their priorities? Was it just strictly developed top down, social justice, sustainable development, life, domain satisfaction? Why were some selected and other? This is a great question, and there's a lot I could say about this, but our process of developing what we really tried to do early on was use the research and science about what is understood about what leads to individual and community well-being and measure things that mattered to the research, measured things that we had data or we could get data about, and things that we could really do something about. And, you know, so for instance, that question in our survey about do people feel this is a community we can live in, that was sort of our question that mattered a lot to people in our community, which is why we asked that question. Another community might ask about something else. So I would say we were very focused on equity. Some of the key leaders in this work were really people who had been fighting for many, many years to make sure that we had good libraries and out of school time programs and affordable housing. So we're very tied to our environmental and sustainability work. I think in Santa Monica, our goals around water self-sufficiency, about carbon neutrality, around waste were some of the big areas in our environmental movement. And what we were really trying to do was to elevate and lift up the social and the sort of people side of things in our well-being framework.
Julie, we also have a raised hand
Oh, great.
from Eduardo Leal.
Okay.
Eduardo?
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, Eduardo.
Julie, hi, Julie.
Hi, Eduardo.
I'm in Monterrey, Mexico.
Oh,
and near to United States, the border with Texas.
yes.
I really enjoy your speech. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Eduardo. And I just have to say, on a personal note, my daughter is leaving for Mexico early next week to spend a year. She's 23 and she'll be teaching in Guadalajara. And I live for a year.
Guadalajara.
So I'm very fond of your country, and I think we have a lot to learn from each other. Thank you for
with mariachi. And how was in Guadalajara, in environment Guadalajara? Do you like?
Well, my daughter is going next week, so I haven't been with her yet, but we lived in Oaxaca for a year and I love Oaxaca. So I know Oaxaca a little better than Guadalajara. But again, I think we have so much to learn from each other. And I think one of the wonderful opportunities in this convening is that there's people from all over the world. So thank you.
Okay. With this family situation is good opportunity for you. You're learning Spanish.
Yeah.
Do you learn or you learn? Okay.
Lifelong learning.
Okay. Only one question.
Yes.
I agree absolutely with you that well-being is not like the machine. Give me well-being. Okay. The specific question is, what do you think about the nice profile about key leader in a well-being process in community? What is the profile about behavior, about knowledge, about attitude? I think that not all people like work that leader in a well-being process in community. What do you think about the good profile of key leader for community?
I think this is an extremely important question. And I do think it's about a willingness to learn. And, I know as human beings, we like predictability. And so that can be challenging. But I think, one of the things, and I'm going to get into this now in the lessons learned. So I hope to answer your question as we move forward. But I think it has a lot to do with an open, curious mindset and a willingness to collaborate. I think these are extremely, extremely important characteristics. So I think, those are the first things that come to my mind. And maybe what I can do is use your question as a sort of a springboard into what are some of the challenges that we've seen. So I think I'm gonna do that, if that's okay with you. And I do want to say, Kelsey, your question about hearing from workers, this is a really important question, and I think is something that we didn't do enough of in Santa Monica, was really pay attention to the particular well-being needs of the workforce. I think this would be, I'm going to use this as a starting point into some of the challenges and lessons. I think we plowed into this as if everyone and now I'm talking about the city government workforce, I don't think we were very focused on what workers and city staff were doing, what their programs were doing, but less focused on how they were doing. And I think this was a bit of a learning that we came to a little too late. So I think this is a very important point that you're making.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So going on to some of the challenges and what we learned. Well, one of the big challenges was that because this was not simply about data and using data. It was about culture change, that there's that expression that culture eats policy and innovation for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I think it's really true. You've really got to pay attention to the culture of your community. In Santa Monica, we're a very high functioning government. We work really hard and do a lot really well. And I think, this idea that people needed to step up and do some things differently, it can be very threatening, and I think was a challenge that we had. I think the word and the language around well-being can really be misappropriated, and I think it can be used as sort of window dressing. It sounds good, but what does it really mean? And this is really important, especially when you're coming from an institutional or government perspective. This is not something that is discretionary, but it really is a first principle of government, and how we bring that seriousness of purpose in our language and our understanding of what we're talking about is extremely challenging and is important. And I would say another challenge is that systems change is hard work. And one of the problems as you're going to use different data sources and really address some of the challenges and opportunities that arise is you've got to have practices in place that are effective at helping people to work together across disciplines and systems. And I think that's often underestimated, just how hard that work is. So those would be some of the challenges. I think when it comes to some of the lessons we learned, an opportunity with well-being and a framework like the one that we've used and I've shared with you is that this really is a catalyst to break down silos. And, one of the things that I think we all understand, and if we didn't understand it before COVID and we didn't understand it before all of the realities that we've lived through together across the United States, across the world, of the last 18 months, if we didn't understand it before, we better understand now that we've got some big challenging problems. And so really looking at gaps and new ways of addressing things, this is an opportunity in the work that we're all doing to really bring people together. I think another lesson was just that really ties to the challenge of creating change is that it doesn't happen overnight. So oftentimes what you need to do is really stay focused on small wins that really can together be strategic and intentional to lift up stronger and better culture change. I think also we're really finding, I'm sorry, my notes got out of line here, excuse me. Something else that we really have identified is the importance of really not being so wed to one approach to tackling something. So for instance, I've shared with you the framework we use, the data sources we've used, the language that we're using, but I think these things are continually being developed and may look slightly or very different in different places. So really what we've really come to is there's certain key elements that are necessary in really having an effective well-being approach. And so these are some of the things that we've identified, that having guiding principles is key. So for instance, using multiple data sources, looking at things across the life cycle, bringing racial equity sort of front and center to the work, being cross-disciplinary, building on assets and strengths of a community as well as deficits and challenges and disparities is really important. Looking for unexpected partnerships and hubs of activities. You know, for instance, in the local government context, libraries are a tremendously valuable hub in communities and can be used in lots of creative ways. We found tremendous partnership from some of our library and school and park staff. And really, identifying the leaders that are going to really be champions for this work is also really important. So really having some guiding principles is one of the key elements that we think is important. A second area is to really assess the environment of your community and really understand what the goals might be, looking to look for opportunities. You know, one of the things that I've learned in government is things come in cycles, and I think this is true in many organizations. So when you have an opportunity to make a change, the idea is to get in there and push that window open high and do everything you can, because something else is going to come up and be a priority. And I think with something like a well-being framework that's really got a lot of utility in different areas, you've really got to be thinking about where your community is needing some help, where there's some real opportunities to be working on some specific areas for certain populations that may have needs. What are the sort of the conversations that are necessary to have? For instance, our school district in our community has been a really key partner, and over the years that's taken different shape, whether it's been parent leaders or certain key principals who have really emerged as people who are trusted by members of the community, become spokespeople, and can really help lead the way on this work. And I think this really also leads to lining up your assets and your evidence. And I think this is really important. Looking at what is the data culture within an organization or a community. Do you have a university that can pair with your government? Do you have some really key open source data that can be shared and you can use as a starting point for a conversation with community leaders? What are your resources, your existing resources that might be able to be deployed in order to try something new? And how might that then lead to new resources? In city government, we do a lot of plans. And I think one of the things that's important to look at is if it's time to do a new housing element, for instance. That's something that is a core function of many local governments, to really look at our housing goals. How can you bring a well-being mindset into that? So how can you kind of leverage opportunities that are coming up in what may seem like a different area, where you can start to embed and share some new ways of thinking? The area of research and evidence around what works, I think, again, I think we can't underscore this enough, that, for instance, social connections and the social infrastructure, to me, is one of the key areas of a well-being framework, to really have people begin to understand that our social infrastructure matters. It can be measured, it can be improved. There's lots of ways to understand the sort of social infrastructure. And I think one of the things is we're very, very keyed into things like physical infrastructure, our roads and bridges and our digital infrastructure, but we've really got to begin to think about how the human infrastructure is a really important part of what we need to understand and measure and make sure is working effectively. So we have a number of different considerations for how to get started. And I think when it comes to the sort of advice for getting started, I'd say a couple of things. you know, perfect is the enemy of good enough always and forever. And yet you've got to really be starting someplace that is going to lead you someplace that matters and that is really effective. So what small steps can you take? What are the key sort of understanding an organization and the needs of stakeholders? What are your implementation considerations and operational realities? You know, for instance, we found some leaders in our public works department that at first didn't totally get what it was that we were talking about, and how a well-being framework really mattered to their work. And they became some of our biggest champions. Similarly, in our fire department, you know, we had some leaders who really began to step up and see the work that they were doing as integral to not only saving lives and the sort of health aspects of what they were, the health and safety aspects, but being able to sort of reposition and kind of talk in some new ways about the value of their work. So looking at these implementation and operational considerations and realities are very important. And finally, I think it's about keeping innovation at the forefront and collaboration at the forefront, so that, you know, we can really begin to understand how to think, how to kind of continue the things that work effectively, but find new ways to tweak and reposition those things that don't. And what you find in collaborative settings is this is where you can often get some of the best ideas, because you'll hear something new from someone who's coming at it from a completely different perspective. And I think the more we have those opportunities, the more we can create some really great, oops, excuse me, I'm trying to advance my slides, some really great new, excuse me, solutions. So, oops, I'm trying to figure out how to move my big, oh, here we go. So again, here's a little bit more of a summary of the kinds of things that I think we all need to be thinking about: taking a good look at the state of data in the organization, bringing a team together, expecting bumps. I think celebrating success is really important in initiatives like this, having the challenging community conversations to increase understanding, leadership, and really using our budget cycles are all things that are important in doing this work. Okay. And finally, where do we go from here? So I just wanted to spend the last couple of minutes, and then I really hope we can open it up for a little bit more discussion of really looking at where we go from here and some of what a group like this can really be doing to advance this field of quality of life, of well-being, of measurement and practice. You know, I think Nancy Hay is going to talk more about this tomorrow, but this reality that so much of the research that is done just never makes it out into the world is really a shame. It's a crime, in fact. And I think I've heard different percentages on this, but something like only 30% of the research that's done ever makes it out. And it takes something like 15 to 17 years to get research to change our public health practices, to change our education practices, to really advance how we're working with people. So I think generally, we really need to be thinking about how the research to practice pipeline can be more rapid and effective. The second thing I think that is so important to work on is shared expertise. You know, the people in an organization like this have such incredible knowledge about data and data fluency and how to look at things at a population level, look at evaluative data. I was reading through the abstract and I'm just so blown away by the number of different projects that are out there in behavioral economics and in all kinds of specialty and subpopulation areas, and really evaluating any number of initiatives. So I think the expertise around things like data, how to create new approaches so that we can really evaluating what does it take to create organizational change. And I think this really does tie to the third area, which is leadership. What's the knowledge? What are the skills and the capacity? And what are the mindset shifts that are demanded, in fact, for us to solve the big issues that we're all facing? I think these are really important leadership challenges, and there's some, again, amazing tools and great opportunities for us to do more with leadership development and knowledge, and embedding these kinds of the sort of openness and the curiosity and the learning that's necessary for leaders and for people inside organizations and community leaders to really advance change. The fourth area is really looking at unexpected partners. I can't underscore this enough. I think some of the best ideas can come from people and places that we don't expect to hear from. Again, our micro grants have been such a great, given us great evidence about that, about how some of our emerging community leaders have stepped up to create new ideas and new initiatives that really we never would have thought of in government. And I think if you can support people in these kinds of practices, we can get some really positive, powerful results. Young people in particular, I think, are very open and ripe to be engaged in the fields of well-being, quality of life, sustainability. Obviously, there's such a huge understanding about the need to address climate change and what's happening in the environment, economic inequality, racial injustice. These are things that young people have quite a bit of comfort and fluency in addressing. I think there's a huge openness to new ways of doing things. And I'm finding one of the most exciting areas in my own work is what I'm doing in partnership with young people, where I can share my own expertise and what I've learned, and really learn from the ideas and the creativity and the energy of young people. I think we've really got to look at the role of money, and I think we have to look at capitalism and the purpose of an economy. I mean, there's just, I think, no doubt that we have a lot of different ideas about this, and we have different perspectives, and this is not an easy one, but I think it's got to be central in our conversations about quality of life and well-being and the environment. We've got to look at the growth mentality that we've all become so, I think, accustomed to supporting, and we've got to really ask ourselves, what is the purpose of our economy, and is our economy in service of people and planet, or are people and planet in service of an economy? And if it's the latter, I think we're really, we can see where we're headed, and it's not good. So I think really being smart about the role of money and how we're investing money, and really what are the adjustments that can be made to be sure that our economy is in service of people is incredibly important. We haven't talked much about mental health, and clearly this is an extremely important area, both you know, just the stress that I think all of us are in, and coming out of COVID, I think there's this sort of shared recognition that life has been upended, and that has had a wide variety of effects on people, and certainly the so-called essential workers who have been out there taking care of us in our healthcare system, in our grocery stores, keeping the economy going on the front lines, have really suffered a tremendous amount. And, you know, I think we're all just beginning to see the effects of what the last 18 months of a shared trauma has really been for us, and what are the manifestations of that. The other thing that I want to really point to in terms of mental health is the absolute importance of us dealing with brain health and serious persistent mental illness, which you can't live in a you can't live in a community and not see the effects of this. You can't live in a family and not see the effects of this. And serious mental illness is not, these are diseases that we really have not yet reconciled with. And so related to both the mental health challenges that the entire population faces, as well as the mental health challenges of serious persistent mental illness, I think we've got to look at the need that all people have for a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and the culture that supports that. This is very important. This isn't just some foofy thing that should be secondary in our public policy and in our discussions. This is ground zero for a good life for people. And I think well-being really points us in that direction. And then finally, I think as we go forward, we can really learn a lot about how we think about the things that we're doing inside our various public health, education, economic systems, our government systems, in terms of the effect and the outcome, not just in terms of the sort of widget counting. And I think we really need to think about the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and find new ways to have a participatory orientation to solving problems. And that really leads us to be innovators and to continue to work in our fields that have been around for a long time, but find ways to be sure that those fields are fresh and they're really inviting people in and they're open. And I think this is the work that a group like this can be at the forefront of. So I thank you for your time. I hope we can have a little bit of a discussion. I'd invite you to reach out and connect. We'd love to work with you at Civic Wellbeing Partners. We're a startup organization that's looking to share and spread what we've learned and to continue to learn from others and be part of this growing movement of a well-being economy, of a well-being approach to government and to public policy. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Carol.
Well, Julie, this is wonderful as expected, and really just covers so much ground. I just wanted to, before, I know we've got a couple of questions and Jill is, I think, on top of those, but I just wanted to reiterate your point about mental health and well-being going hand in hand. It's something we've been in some joint meetings about. And there's a related, the OECD has a new effort called Brain Capital, which is all about dealing with the not just mental illness, but mental well-being over the life course. Everything from early screening of depression to dealing with, what are ways to prevent Alzheimer's and late life mental decline. And the other side of it that I think is resonates a lot with some of the work that you've done to engage, adolescents who come from deprived backgrounds is trying to impart the kinds of cognitive and socio-emotional skills that kids or young adults will need as they go into this next stage of the world economy. I mean, we know that the classic manual labor jobs are declining everywhere, and that the kinds of jobs that, require, it doesn't have to be university, but that require, that require the kind of socio-emotional skills and cognitive skills that to participate in that economy have a lot to do with not just good mental health, but also good well-being and the kinds of things that are part and parcel of well-being. You know, some degree of extroversion, some degree of being able to make, to make social contacts, to sort of be able to think across disciplinary boundaries and to be creative. And I think you've done so much with the youth population in Santa Monica. I don't know if you have are willing to just say a few words about some of the programs that you all ran. My personal favorite is obviously the farmers market, the art project one,
Yeah.
because it's so engaged the youth in the community in the municipal efforts. But I'm sure you have others, and I know Civic Wellbeing Partners is moving on and doing more along those lines.
Yeah, I think this is it is just so important. It just goes back to the role of young people and their creativity and ingenuity and energy to make a difference. And I see this in my own family with my kids, and just having been around a lot of really bright, talented 20-something-year-olds who really do want to make a difference in the world. And I think we have to make the space for them to do that. To your specific question about some of the things we've done. So we've partnered with design schools. One of them, and this is what Carol's referencing, is the Design Matters through the Art Center of Pasadena, is a resource here in the LA area. And there's places like this all over. And really, it was very interesting to, we shared a lot of the data that we had collected, and we really put the challenge out to these students through a studio class that was a partnership with in this particular case, we had a professor who did data visualization, marketing, professor, and someone who had a lot of expertise in social media. And that group of faculty worked with a group of about 20 young people, and they came up with, they just were iterating and pitching ideas about how do you share about well-being data? How do you make something that can sort of seem data dry, boring, really engaging? And one of the things they came up with, and we have a really short video that can be shared on this, it's on our website. I can put it out in the follow-up notes. They came up with this idea of doing community portraits where, much like you do an awkward family photo where everybody sits together, this was really about pulling people together at our farmers markets and community events together to sit and just do a photo together. And it really became, and then we gave everybody who participated a little booklet that had some of the findings from the Wellbeing Index, and people would meet each other and take these great photos. But this idea of showing the importance of coming together and community network through actually doing a small scale intervention at public events was something that these students came up. But they also came up with some ideas about how to create some games with data, board game, and some other things. So I think, again, these are examples of some of the ways that we never would have come up with this inside of City Hall with a bunch of us sitting around thinking about how do we share findings. I think the other thing with young people is we've had some really powerful engagement with law enforcement and young people to really understand each other more. We've done some very creative things there around, and we could share some videos and examples of that. I will also say that I'm finding some real interest in what's happening through the We All movement, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, with their youth hubs. And there's been some interesting podcasts and writings, and we're trying to get some of the young people here in our community connected with young people in other countries. There's a learning market that is some young people in New York and young people here in California, where they're developing their small scale businesses together and learning how to do that. And in the process, meeting people from different cultures and helping stimulate ideas for entrepreneurial activities. So I just think there's really a lot that can be done that can have some direct benefits in terms of economics, can have some also some real benefits in terms of purpose and health, and kind of creating the conditions of social connection.
That's great. Thanks. Jill, do you want to, I think there are a couple questions in the chat, or are those old ones?
No, these have not been addressed yet. So Julie, if you want to click on the Q&A down there, we ask them to speak, or you can just read them and answer.
I'm sorry,
Well, we can just,
you know what,
Graciela, do you want to just start and say your question? Are you still there? Maybe she's not there anymore. There she is. And then Joe Sergi is after.
I am here. I am here. Can you listen to me?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie, for this extraordinary presentation. And thank you, Carol, for inviting Julie. Yes, it's very interesting. Thank you, both of you. No, only
Where are you, Graciela? Just so Julie knows.
Okay. Oh, well, only a little question, because the presentation was extraordinary, but in some part you speak about the perceptions of the residents. So as I am, first of all, a social worker, and as a social worker working in communities, I am very much interested in this. And I only want to ask you if you consider the possibility, or perhaps you did it, I don't know, of working with the people to know more about their perceptions, about using, for instance, interviews or focus groups or another technique. But I know we have only a few minutes, so only to ask you this.
Yes, I think we've a lot of times, I think what we say about data and the findings is that they're a starting point for conversations. So for instance, at the neighborhood, we've done some really interesting work with a neighborhood level project. I mean, I talked a little bit about the downtown community plan. That was very much about a city process, but another project we did in our one neighborhood called the Pico neighborhood here in Santa Monica, where we really did a sort of an idea sprint where we and I could share some photos and more information about this, where we had people really get into groups and kind of go around. This was pre-COVID, but where we really did some brainstorming and idea generation for new ways to address things and new solutions. And that was really powerful. And what we found in that process was there was a lot of interest in community wealth building and small scale entrepreneurial activities. And people had some really good ideas about how to support that, how to make more space for art and culture, sharing art and culture. We had some findings around, I'll give you just a very specific example, some findings about low rates of eating fruits and vegetables, and knowing that eating healthy and eating fruits and vegetables is a good sort of proxy for overall physical health. And what we were trying, but yet we have all these farmers markets. So one of the things that we were trying to do was create better connections between the farmers markets and our residents, who often thought that the farmers markets were too expensive, were not for them, etc. So we did a number of initiatives where there was a treasure hunt for kids to find certain fruits and vegetables at the farmers markets, where we did cooking classes, where we did a cookbook of neighbors came up in a particular area, came up with their cookbook of their favorite recipes and shared these kinds of things. So I don't know if I'm answering your question in terms of a focus group per se, but I think we've done a number of civic engagement where we try to lead with the data, but have a process that's more kind of roll up your sleeve, creative, and come up with solutions that can be shared and spread. So that's those are some of the things that we've done, using the data, using the things that we know matter from research and science, but then engaging people with new action.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you, Julie.
And Graciela is calling in or zooming in from Buenos Aires in Argentina.
Oh,
Thank you for answering
Yes.
that. Thank you for answering that, Jill. Yeah. And
I
then I
will
guess
write
we
to
have,
you. I will write to you because it's very interesting and I copy the email. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
thank you.
I think
Great,
we
we
have
have-
Joe Sergi, right?
Joe, if you would like to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great, great. Hi, Julie. My question is about the political divide in the United States and how it affected the community, especially the indicators projects. I'm very familiar with Santa Monica. As a matter of fact, I lived in Santa Monica at one point. My first degree was from UCLA. And I know, the sort of the people that live in Santa Monica, and there's definitely a political divide between the what you might call the conservative Republicans and the liberal Democrats. And how did you deal with that, with this kind of political divide in your indicators project?
Well, it's a work in progress always. I would say, we're still dealing with that. There's been a lot of turmoil in political turmoil in Santa Monica. I mean, relatively speaking, over the decades that I've lived and worked here, there's been a lot of political stability, divisions about rent control and affordable housing and landlords versus tenants and some of that, those kinds of issues, development, the size and scale of development. I think, how are we dealing with that? I think what we've tried to do is get underneath the concerns, because I think if you stay at sort of the level of the vitriol and the battle and the, I'm being treated this way or you're being treated that way, you don't ever get anywhere. It just kind of goes in circles. So I think a lot of what we've tried to do is to create spaces and opportunities for people to be heard and respected and to find middle way solutions. It's not perfect. It's but I think that I do think there's something about this kind of work that has the potential to be unifying because I think at the end of the day, people want a good life, and people want to feel like their life matters. And, I think if we can get to those kinds of discussions and that kind of mutual respect, we do a lot better. And I have to say, it's very humbling to realize that some of the things that we think are so effective and good are really not what I think we have to be willing to reflect on things and create spaces where that can happen. So that's what we try and do.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Great. We have another question from Kelsey O'Connor. We have time, Kelsey, if you'd like to ask it.
Sure. Julie, this is fantastic. I'm thinking about, where and how to, take your video and share it with others to take so many of the ideas that you've discussed. And that's what my question really is about. And it's piggybacking a little bit on Joe's. Oh, I lost it. There it is. Is your program scalable? Is it transferable? You indicated how Santa Monica is different, how it was already a government where you tried to be engaging with the community. There's also different socioeconomic and demographic profiles. So I wonder, is it scalable? Is it transferable? And have any other communities taken up your example?
Yes, I love this question because I think this is where it's at, right? Is really figuring out what can be shared and replicated. And it's not a franchise model where you just pick it up and plop it down. Like, I don't think that works, but I do think, and I have seen a number of really great examples. So there's been several communities that have used some of the data collection and the surveying that we've done as just a way to begin a discussion. There have been some other, there's a tri-community area in rural Vermont that is doing something around a well-being initiative that looks very different. The issues are very different. The institutional partners are very different, but some of the key principles are really the same. And we've started to work with them, and that's been really exciting. There's some work going on in Charlotte, the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and the county there in particular, where they're really looking at not only measuring the well-being of their residents, but they're sort of building off of some other initiatives and trying to sort of pivot them or redirect them to be sure that they're not only building out their data and their understanding of things like subjective well-being and kind of adding that to the mix of administrative data that they use, but trying to use some innovation practices around civic engagement. We did develop a playbook that is about community engagement and grounding community engagement in well-being and racial equity. And I'd be happy to share that and talk about some of the strategies that we developed there. So I guess the short answer is yes. I do think it's sort of time, place, and manner. It's about, what is the opportunity? What are the issues that are top of mind? How do you kind of take a starting point and keep a North Star of what does it mean to essentially create and sort of stand up language and strategies that lead to community collective well-being. But I think that is starting to happen, and there's lots of great examples.
Thank you.
I'd be interested, Kelsey, to know what you're thinking about in particular, where you are, what you're seeing, what you think might be useful from some of what we've talked about this morning.
Well, so I studied in Southern California. I studied in LA, but I reside in Luxembourg. And Luxembourg, as a total population, right, is substantially smaller than some of the neighborhoods in LA. And we have some similarities in that there's a large number of people that drive over the border. And so we are unable, relating to my previous question, to have information about the people who choose to work there but not live there.
Right.
But then being a relatively small place, I think the academics are, let's say, it may be easier for them to speak to the policymakers. So I'm not in the position now to have any influence, but maybe a few years from now. And part of it is, and it's me personally, it's not to say that my colleagues don't have influence, but I'm relatively junior. So all right, so that's more of my background. And then one of the things I'm seeing though is, you mentioned Nancy Hay. So, some of the work that's being done in the UK, including the What Works Wellbeing Center, but then also what's happening in New Zealand, or even the UAE, which, so then a follow-up question from me would be, how much are you representing Santa Monica paying attention to what's happening in, let's say, New Zealand, or other places that are trying to implement these policies?
So we just have just a few minutes. So I think we have to wrap up.
Just say the answer is yes. And I think that's where it's at. I mean, there's places in India that are doing this work. There's yes. And I think our learnings are built off of the successes and the lessons from other places. And hopefully we can share what we're seeing and doing. So I think this is where it's at, to learn from each other and to share and spread and replicate.
Thank you.
Kelsey. I think we have 4 more minutes if anyone else has any final comments or questions.
And maybe I would just like to say that I'd love to hear from anybody who's got ideas of things. I'd love to be able to share things that we've done. And, you know, one of the things, we're doing some work with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation around a landscape assessment of what's going on, particularly in the US, and how the US can learn from some of these global initiatives that Kelsey, you just mentioned. So this is a space that I'm really focused on in the